The ocean was a sheet of cobalt glass, indifferent and vast, stretching to a horizon that bled into a sky of impossible clarity. It was November 14, 2004. 80 miles off the coast of San Diego, the world's most powerful naval armada, the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group, was conducting routine training exercises. But what was about to unfold was anything but routine. It was an event that would shatter the paradigms of seasoned aviators, confound the world's most advanced sensor technology, and whisper a terrifying new truth into the corridors of power. High above the placid water, Commander David Fravor, a 16-year veteran of the United States Navy and the commanding officer of the Strike Fighter Squadron 41, the Black Aces, sat in the cockpit of his FA-18F Super Hornet. He was the archetype of the modern warrior pilot, calm, disciplined, a graduate of the prestigious Top Gun school, a man trained to identify any known aircraft on the planet in a fraction of a second. His world was one of physics, of aerodynamics, of concrete threats and calculated responses. It was a world that was about to be irrevocably broken. A voice crackled in his helmet, a voice from the USS Princeton, the Ticonderoga-class cruiser tasked with guarding the carrier group's airspace. The voice of the operations specialist was laced with a strange mixture of urgency and disbelief. For 2 weeks, the Princeton's state-of-the-art AN/SPY-1 radar system, the Aegis combat system, the very shield of the fleet, had been tracking ghosts, unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs, appearing suddenly at 80,000 feet, far beyond the ceiling of any known aircraft, before plunging towards the sea at hypersonic speeds, only to stop instantly, hovering just meters above the churning waves. They would then shoot back up into the thin, cold air of the stratosphere, or simply vanish from the scope in the blink of an eye. The official term was anomalous aerial vehicle. To the radar operators who watched these phantoms dance across their screens for days on end, they were simply the others. Now, the Princeton had another one, and it was waiting. Fravor and his wingman, Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, were diverted from their training exercise, their mission to intercept and identify the unknown, to put a name and a shape to the electronic specters that had been haunting the fleet. As their jets sliced through the perfect blue, the controller guided them toward the last known coordinates of the object. But as they approached the merge plot, the point where their flight path and the objects should intersect, a strange silence descended. The object was no longer on the Princeton's radar. It had vanished again. But something else was there. Looking down at the ocean, Fravor saw it. The calm surface of the Pacific was disturbed. A patch of water, roughly the size of a 737, was being churned into a white frothing chaos, as if a massive invisible object was submerged just beneath the surface, boiling the sea from below. There were no waves breaking in any particular direction. It was a localized, violent anomaly in an otherwise serene seascape. And then, hovering erratically above this turmoil, was the source of the fleet's 2-week-long mystery. It was an object unlike anything Fravor had ever seen. It was smooth, white, oblong, and completely seamless. It had no wings, no tail, no cockpit, no exhaust plumes, no visible means of propulsion whatsoever. It moved, in his later words, like a tic-tac, darting and changing direction with an impossible instantaneous agility. It moved with a logic that defied physics, a fluid and erratic dance that seemed to respond to his very presence. This was not an aircraft. This was not a helicopter. This was not a drone. This was something else, something utterly, fundamentally alien to the principles of flight that had governed his entire life. What was this object? What was it doing above that strange disturbance in the water? And why, in a sky filled with the most sophisticated military hardware ever assembled, did it seem to operate with complete and total impunity, as if the laws of nature themselves did not apply? The encounter had only just begun, but already the world of Commander David Fravor, and our own, was tilting on its axis. The questions that arose in that moment would echo for years, challenging not just our understanding of technology, but our most basic assumptions about our place in the cosmos. The mystery of the Nimitz was no longer just a series of phantom blips on a radar screen. It now had a face, and it was staring back. What followed in the next few minutes would be recorded analyzed, dismissed, and eventually leaked to a world wholly unprepared for its implications. It was the moment the veil was torn, revealing a glimpse of a reality far stranger and more complex than we had ever dared to imagine. It was a day when the silent, indifferent ocean gave up a secret shaped like a tic-tac, moving with the speed of thought, a harbinger of a profound and unsettling new age. The events of November 14th did not materialize out of a vacuum. They were the culmination of a creeping anomaly, a technological haunting that had beset the Nimitz carrier strike group for nearly 2 weeks prior. To understand the climax of the encounter, one must first descend into the dimly lit, artificially cooled heart of the USS Princeton, into the Combat Information Center, or CIC. Here, in this nerve center of naval warfare, surrounded by the glow of 100 monitors, men and women spent their days watching the sky, not with their eyes, but through the all-seeing gaze of the Aegis combat system. This was the domain of Senior Chief Petty Officer Kevin Day, a man with 20 years of experience in air defense and radar operations. He was the investigator within the machine, the first to notice that something was profoundly wrong in the airspace they were sworn to protect. Beginning in early November 2004, as the strike group performed its workups for deployment to the Persian Gulf, Day and his team began detecting strange tracks on their SPY-1B radar arrays. These were not the faint, ambiguous returns of weather phenomena or flocks of birds. These were solid, coherent targets, appearing as groups of 5 to 10, moving in a loose formation. Their behavior was what set them apart, what began to sow the seeds of disbelief and concern among the seasoned operators. The contacts would appear abruptly at extreme altitudes, around 80,000 feet, an altitude reserved for spy planes and spacecraft on re-entry. From this perch at the edge of space, they would plummet towards the ocean, descending 60,000 feet in a matter of seconds. The velocity was staggering, far exceeding the capabilities of any known aircraft, friendly or hostile. Then, just as suddenly, they would halt their dive, coming to a dead stop at 20,000 feet, where they would hover, motionless, for minutes or even hours. From this stationary position, they would either shoot straight back up to their original altitude at impossible speeds, or simply vanish from the scopes entirely, as if a switch had been flicked. The system, the most advanced integrated air defense network on the planet, was baffled. It couldn't classify them. It couldn't predict their movements. It could only label them as unidentified. Day and his team ran every diagnostic imaginable. They recalibrated the multi-billion-dollar system, rebooted it, checked for atmospheric interference, for glitches, for any rational explanation that could account for these phantom fleets. The system was clean. The diagnostics came back perfect. The Aegis was operating at peak efficiency. The conclusion, however unsettling, was inescapable. The radar was not malfunctioning. The targets were real. They were physical objects, moving in ways that violated the known laws of physics and aerodynamics. The authority, in the form of the ship's command structure, was notified. The initial reaction was one of skepticism. It had to be a system error, a previously unknown glitch, or perhaps a highly advanced, still classified electronic warfare test being conducted on them without their knowledge. The idea of a blue-on-blue exercise where friendly forces test the fleet's defenses was a plausible, almost comforting explanation. It was a known unknown. But as the days wore on, this explanation began to fray. The phenomena were too persistent, too bizarre. The objects moved at speeds estimated between 12,000 and 28,000 miles per hour. They performed instantaneous accelerations and decelerations that would crush any human pilot and tear apart any known airframe. They exhibited, in the sterile language of military analysis, trans-medium capability, moving with equal ease through the thin air of the upper atmosphere and the dense water of the Pacific Ocean. The location of these events was also significant. They were consistently appearing near San Clemente Island, a Navy-controlled training ground off the coast of Southern California. This was a highly restricted airspace, a sanctuary for the military to test its latest and most secret technologies. Was this the answer? A new generation of unmanned aerial vehicle, a secret drone program being put through its paces. It was a theory. But it didn't fit all the facts. The performance characteristics were simply too far beyond the known horizon of human engineering. The energy required for such maneuvers would be immense, yet the objects left no thermal signature, no sonic boom, no exhaust trail. They were silent, invisible specters to the naked eye, existing only as electronic ghosts in the machine. Kevin Day began to meticulously log the contacts, building a case file on this persistent and deeply strange phenomenon. He noted their patterns. They would often appear over a specific geographic point, a latitude and longitude that would later become known as the CAP point, the Combat Air Patrol point, where fighter jets would circle, waiting for instructions. It was as if the objects were drawn to this location, as if they were observing the fleet's operations. The atmosphere in the Princeton CIC shifted from professional curiosity to a quiet, simmering tension. The operators, trained to identify and neutralize threats in seconds, were faced with a puzzle they could not solve. They were watching a display of technology so far advanced that it rendered their own cutting-edge systems obsolete. It was like showing a musket to a legion of Roman soldiers. The context was missing. The frame of reference did not exist. This was the backdrop for the November 14th encounter. It was not a singular, isolated event. It was the moment when a 2-week-long electronic haunting finally decided to manifest in the physical world, in broad daylight, in front of the most credible witnesses the military could produce. The stage was set. The authority was confused, the investigator was perplexed, and the witness was about to fly directly into the heart of the mystery. The question was no longer simply, what are these things? A new, more chilling question was beginning to form. What do they want? The sky above the Nimitz was no longer just an empty space to be traversed. It had become a theater for the unknown, and the curtain was about to rise. The men and women at the heart of the Nimitz incident were not prone to flights of fancy. They were products of a rigorous, unforgiving system that prizes precision, discipline, and empirical evidence above all else. They were the human components in a vast and complex military machine, their perceptions honed by thousands of hours of training to filter out ambiguity and focus on verifiable fact. To understand the profound impact of the encounter, one must first understand the mindset of those who experienced it. They were the perfect witnesses, precisely, because their world had no room for the impossible. Commander David Fravor was the epitome of the naval aviator. A graduate of the Navy Fighter Weapons School, known to the world as Top Gun, he was not just a pilot. He was a leader, responsible for the lives of the men and women in his squadron, the Black Aces. His career was built on a foundation of physics and engineering. He understood the limits of an airframe, the G-forces a human body could endure, the principles of lift, thrust, and drag that governed everything that flew. His mind was a catalog of aircraft silhouettes, engine sounds, and missile capabilities from every nation on Earth. When he looked at the sky, he saw a knowable space, a chessboard of tactical possibilities defined by hard data. Imagination was a liability. Hysteria was a death sentence. His wingman on that day, Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, shared this worldview. A career pilot herself, she was one of the first women to fly combat missions in the F-14 Tomcat and was now a seasoned FA-18F pilot. Like Fravor, her reality was shaped by checklists, flight plans, and the unwavering laws of aerodynamics. Their squadron mates, the other pilots in their flight of 4 Super Hornets, were cast from the same mold. They were the best of the best, selected for their stability under pressure, their quick reflexes, and their unwavering adherence to procedure. They were, in essence, professional skeptics, trained to trust their instruments and their training above all else. Then there was the crew of the USS Princeton. In the Combat Information Center, Senior Chief Kevin Day was the gatekeeper of the fleet's electronic senses. His job was not to fly, but to see. He interpreted the abstract language of radar returns, translating blips and vectors into a coherent picture of the battlespace. For him, reality was a stream of data packets, a world rendered in green and amber on a cathode ray tube. He had spent 2 decades learning to trust the Aegis system, to understand its nuances, its strengths, and its limitations. The system was an extension of his own consciousness, a technological eye that could pierce through clouds and darkness to reveal the truth of the sky. When the Aegis showed him something impossible, it was not the data he questioned, but the nature of reality itself. Finally, there was the crew of the E-2C Hawkeye, the airborne early warning and control aircraft circling high above the fleet. They were the eyes in the sky, their powerful rotating radar dome providing a comprehensive 360-degree view of the airspace for hundreds of miles. They were the orchestra conductors of the air battle, vectoring fighters, identifying threats, and maintaining order in the chaotic skies of a naval exercise. Their role was to provide clarity, to resolve ambiguity, to paint a single unified tactical picture for the entire strike group. These individuals, from the pilots in their cockpits to the operators deep within the hull of the cruiser, formed a multi-layered network of observation. They were not isolated witnesses. They were interconnected nodes in a system designed for one purpose, to achieve total situational awareness. Each one provided a different piece of the puzzle. The pilots offered visual confirmation, the raw, unfiltered input of the human eye. The radar operators on the Princeton offered high-fidelity, long-range tracking data from the most powerful surface radar in the world. The Hawkeye crew provided a broad, top-down perspective, confirming the presence of objects that ground-based radar might miss. This is what makes the Nimitz encounter so compelling and so difficult to dismiss. It was not a fleeting glimpse by a single, unreliable observer on a dark night. It was a sustained event, observed simultaneously by multiple credible, highly trained military personnel and corroborated by the most advanced sensor platforms in existence. The phenomenon was captured on radar, on infrared cameras, and witnessed with the naked eye. It was a case where the human witness and the machine witness told the same impossible story. When Fravor and Dietrich were sent to investigate the anomaly, they were not just two pilots going for a look. They were the sharpened tip of a spear, the final link in a chain of detection and analysis that had been running for 2 weeks. Their credibility was beyond reproach. Their skills were at their peak. They were being sent to solve a problem that the most powerful machines in the world could not comprehend. And as they flew towards the cap point, towards the churning water and the thing that hovered above it, they carried with them the weight of their entire professional existence, an existence built on a set of rules about the world that were about to be utterly and completely rewritten. The witness archetype in this story is not a single person but a collective, a chorus of trusted voices, all singing the same unbelievable song. Their testimony cannot be easily waved away, for to dismiss them is to dismiss the very system of training, technology, and discipline that forms the bedrock of modern military power. The decision to dispatch Commander Fravor's flight was not made lightly. It was a calculated move, an escalation in a 2-week-long Cold War with an unknown entity. The electronic ghosts had become too persistent, too brazen. The authority, embodied by the command structure of the carrier strike group, needed answers. The passive observation phase was over. It was time for active engagement. As Fravor, Dietrich, and their 2 wingmen banked their Super Hornets away from their scheduled training exercise, a new set of coordinates was fed into their navigation systems. The voice of the Princeton's controller was their only guide, a lifeline of information stretching across 80 miles of empty ocean. The sky was a brilliant cloudless dome, what pilots call severe clear. Visibility was perfect, extending for miles in every direction. There was nowhere for anything to hide. Yet, the sky was empty. As they closed in on the cap point, the target's last known location, the disconnect between what their instruments were telling them and what their eyes were seeing grew more pronounced. The Princeton could still see the object on its powerful SPU-I-1 radar. The E-2 Hawkeye, circling high above, also had a faint intermittent contact. But the pilot's own sophisticated APG-73 radars, powerful enough to detect a fighter jet from over 100 miles away, saw nothing. It was as if the object was selectively invisible, a ghost that only revealed itself to certain forms of observation. This was the first clue that they were dealing with a technology that did not play by their rules. Was it some form of advanced stealth? A cloaking technology that could absorb or deflect radar waves from certain angles? The questions mounted with every mile they flew. The controller from the Princeton gave them the final vector. Merge plot, he announced, the naval term for the point where the fighters and the target would occupy the same piece of sky. You're right on top of it. Fravor and Dietrich scanned the empty blue expanse around them. Nothing. They looked up, down, left, right, the disciplined, methodical scan of a trained fighter pilot. Still nothing. The tension in the cockpit was palpable, a quiet hum of adrenaline and focus. Where was it? Fravor made a decision. He rolled his aircraft to look directly below, and that's when he saw it. Not the object itself, but its effect on the world. The placid surface of the Pacific, a moment ago a uniform shade of deep blue, was now scarred by a patch of roiling white water. It was a disturbance without a source, a circular area of chaos in a sea of calm. It looked, as he would later describe, like a reef or a shoal where there was none, as if a submarine was rising to the surface too quickly. But there were no submarines in the area. This was something else. This was the physical evidence that the electronic ghosts were real. And then, hovering just above this aquatic turmoil, suspended in the air about 50 feet above the waves, was the object. It was small, no more than 40 feet long, and its movements were bizarre, erratic. It wasn't hovering in a stable position like a helicopter. It was darting back and forth, up and down, with no discernible pattern, like a bee trapped in a jar. Its motion was sharp, angular, and completely silent. Fravor communicated with his wingman, confirming the visual. All four pilots in the flight saw the same thing, the churning water and the smooth, white, tic-tac-shaped craft executing its impossible dance. The moment of truth had arrived. The investigation was no longer about radar screens and data logs. It was about a direct visual confrontation with the unknown. Fravor, as the flight lead, decided to get a closer look. He was the witness stepping forward, crossing a threshold from observer to participant. He began a slow, deliberate, circular descent, spiraling down towards the object to get a better angle, to identify it, to find some detail, a seam, a cockpit, an engine nozzle that would place it within the realm of the known. The object, in turn, seemed to notice him. As Fravor's Super Hornet descended, the Tic-Tac began to react. It stopped its erratic random movements and began to ascend, rising to meet him. It moved with a strange intelligence, mirroring his descent path, but in reverse, climbing up the inside of his spiral. It was a moment of profound, unnerving connection. A silent, aerial duel was beginning. He was observing it, and it was observing him. The suspense was absolute. In that moment, suspended between the deep blue of the ocean and the pale blue of the sky, a U.S. Navy commander in one of the world's most advanced fighter jets was face to face with something that should not exist. The training, the years of discipline, the entire framework of his understanding was being stretched to its breaking point. What would it do? What was its intent? Was it hostile? Was it curious? Or was it something so far beyond his comprehension that its motives were as alien as its physics? The build-up to the climax was a slow, deliberate spiral into the heart of the unknown, a descent into a new and unnerving reality. The air was thick with unspoken questions as Commander Fravor guided his FA-18F into a descending spiral. Below him, the Tic-Tac ascended to meet him, a pale, seamless shape against the churning chaos of the water. This was the critical moment, the climax of the encounter, a close-range engagement not with an enemy combatant, but with a profound and startling mystery. As Fravor continued his descent, he cut across the circle, aiming to get nose-on with the object, to get a direct look from a closer vantage point. He wanted to see details, to resolve the ambiguity of its shape, to find a clue to its origin. As he completed his turn and pointed his aircraft's nose toward the Tic-Tac's position, it reacted with a display of speed and agility that defied belief. The object, which had been climbing steadily to meet him, suddenly accelerated. It didn't bank or turn like a conventional aircraft. It simply reoriented itself and shot across his nose, moving with the instantaneous velocity of a projected image. It moved from his left to his right in the blink of an eye, its motion so swift and clean that it seemed to violate the laws of inertia. There was no lag, no buildup of speed. It was stationary one moment and moving at hypersonic velocity the next. Fravor, a man accustomed to the blistering speed of jets, was left stunned. The object then performed another impossible maneuver. It disappeared, not in a flash of light, not by accelerating beyond the horizon, but by simply vanishing. One moment it was there, a solid object in the sky. The next, it was gone. The entire close-range encounter lasted less than a minute, but in that brief window of time, the fundamental rules of the universe as Fravor understood them had been comprehensively broken. Shaken, but still focused, Fravor and his flight regrouped, circling the area where the object had last been seen. The churning disturbance in the water below had also vanished, the ocean returning to its placid, glassy state as if nothing had ever happened. It was over. But the strangeness was not. A voice crackled in their headsets, the calm, professional voice of the radar operator back on the USS Princeton. He had been watching the entire engagement on his scope. "Sir," he said, with a tone of controlled excitement, "you're not going to believe this." The operator explained that the moment the object had vanished from Fravor's sight, it had reappeared on the Princeton's radar. Where had it reappeared? At the flight's original cap point, the rendezvous location they had been given 60 miles away. The object had traversed a distance of 60 miles in less than a minute. The calculation was simple, and the result was unbelievable. To cover that distance in that time, the object would have had to travel at a speed well in excess of 4,000 miles per hour, and it had done so from a dead stop, with no sonic boom and no visible means of propulsion. This was the detail that cemented the impossibility of the event. It wasn't just a visual anomaly. It was a confirmed, radar-tracked demonstration of technology that was, by any reasonable metric, centuries ahead of our own. It exhibited what would later be described by intelligence analysts as the 5 observables of advanced aerospace threats: anti-gravity lift, sudden and instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocities without signatures, like heat trails or sonic booms, low observability or cloaking, and trans-medium travel. The Tic-Tac had demonstrated at least 4 of these 5 characteristics in a single, brazen display. Fravor made the decision to return to the Nimitz. There was nothing more they could do. They had been sent to identify an object, and in a way, they had succeeded. They had identified it as something utterly unknown. As they flew back, the full weight of what they had just witnessed began to settle in. They were pilots, men and women of action, but they had just been rendered helpless spectators by an object that operated with a casual, almost contemptuous mastery of the physical world. It had outmaneuvered them, outrun them, and outthought them at every turn. The object's movement was not just fast, it was intelligent. It had mirrored Fravor's descent, anticipated his move to intercept, and then repositioned itself at their rendezvous point, almost as if it were a game. Was it a probe? Was it a drone? Or was it something else, something with a consciousness that was studying them, testing their reactions, gauging their capabilities? The climax of the Nimitz encounter was not a battle or a chase, it was a lesson. It was a demonstration of a technological supremacy so absolute that it bordered on the magical. The Tic-Tac was a silent predator in the sky, a ghost in the machine that had chosen, for a few brief moments, to reveal itself in the stark light of day. And in doing so, it had delivered a message, not in words, but in physics. You are not alone, and you are not at the top of the food chain. The silence on the flight back to the carrier was heavy with the implications of this new knowledge, a knowledge that would soon ripple through the highest levels of the U.S. military and intelligence communities, leaving a trail of confusion, secrecy, and unanswered questions in its wake. The impossible had happened. Now, the real challenge would be to understand what it meant. The return to the USS Nimitz was a stark transition from the surreal to the mundane. The roar of the engines, the controlled chaos of the flight deck, the familiar rituals of landing and debriefing. It was a world of order and procedure that stood in jarring contrast to the lawless physics they had just witnessed. As Commander Fravor and his fellow pilots unstrapped themselves from their cockpits, the story of their encounter began to spread through the ship like wildfire. It was met with a mixture of curiosity, disbelief, and, from some quarters, open ridicule. The culture of naval aviation is one of professional pride and a certain swagger. Admitting to seeing something inexplicable, something that sounded like it was lifted from a science fiction novel, was not a comfortable position for a squadron commander. In the debriefing rooms, Fravor and Dietrich recounted their story, sticking to the facts, describing the churning water, the seamless white object, its erratic movements, and its impossible acceleration. They were credible witnesses telling an incredible story. Their reputations preceded them. These were not rookies prone to misidentification. They were seasoned veterans at the top of their game. Yet, the story was hard to swallow. Some colleagues drew tic-tacs on a whiteboard with little alien figures waving from them. The event was, for a time, a source of humor, a way to deflect the unsettling implications of what had occurred. But the data told a different story. The radar tapes from the Princeton, the Hawkeye, and the fighters themselves all corroborated the pilots' visual accounts. This was not a hallucination. It was a real, physical event tracked by multiple independent systems. The Authority knew something significant had happened, and another mission was quickly organized. This time, the goal was not just to see the object, but to capture it on camera. A second flight of FA-18F Super Hornets was launched from the Nimitz. The lead aircraft was piloted by Lieutenant Commander Chad Underwood, who, unlike Fravor, was not informed of the specific nature of the target. He was simply told to investigate a radar contact at the cap point. His weapons systems officer in the back seat was tasked with using the aircraft's most advanced sensor, the AN/ASQ-228, Advanced Targeting Forward-Looking Infrared, or IT-FLIAR pod. This was a state-of-the-art piece of equipment capable of detecting and tracking targets from dozens of miles away based on their heat signature. As Underwood's Super Hornet arrived on station, the Princeton's controllers once again guided him toward the target. And once again, the object was there, waiting. It was invisible to the naked eye, but the powerful radar on Underwood's jet immediately got a lock. He switched his displays to the AT-FLIAR camera, slaving it to the radar track. And there it was. A shape appeared on his monitor, a fuzzy, indistinct form against the cold background of the sky. He zoomed in. The shape resolved into a clear, oblong object, glowing with thermal energy but with no discernible heat plume from an engine. It was the Tic-Tac. This was the moment that would produce the now famous FLIR 1 video, a piece of footage that would eventually be leaked to the public and become one of the most significant pieces of UFO evidence in history. In the 90-second clip, the object can be seen hovering, then accelerating to the left with a speed that shocks the pilots. Their reactions, captured on the cockpit audio, are a testament to the strangeness of the event, a mix of profanity, laughter, and pure, unadulterated astonishment. "Look at that thing," one of them exclaims as the object shoots off screen. The AT-FLIAR, one of the most sophisticated tracking systems ever built, could not keep up. It lost its lock as the object simply outran its ability to follow. Underwood attempted to reacquire the target multiple times, but it was gone. It had demonstrated its technological superiority once again, this time not just to the human eye, but to the cold, calculating gaze of an infrared camera. He never saw the object with his own eyes. His entire encounter was mediated through the screens and sensors of his aircraft. He was a digital witness to a digital ghost. When Underwood returned to the Nimitz, his footage was the center of attention. It was tangible proof. It was the hard evidence that corroborated Fravor's story. The ridicule began to subside, replaced by a sense of awe and unease. The pilots watched the footage over and over again in the ready room, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. They were looking at a recording of the impossible. The second sighting cemented the reality of the event within the strike group. It was no longer a matter of eyewitness testimony. It was a documented, recorded phenomenon. The data from Underwood's AT-FLIAR pod, combined with the radar data from the Princeton and the visual reports from Fravor's flight, created a comprehensive and undeniable case file. The witness was no longer just human, it was also the machine. And both were telling the same story. Something unknown, something powerful, and something intelligent had paid them a visit. The implications were staggering, and the official response that would follow would only deepen the mystery. The event was real. The evidence was collected. And then it began to disappear. The evidence collected by the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group during the November 2004 encounters represented an unprecedented treasure trove of high-fidelity data on an unidentified aerial phenomenon. It was a multi-platform, multi-sensor record of an object that behaved in ways that defied conventional explanation. This was not a grainy, out-of-focus photograph from a backyard telescope. This was hard data, captured by billion-dollar military systems, and it painted a picture that was as clear as it was disturbing. At the heart of the evidence was the radar data from the USS Princeton. The AN/SPY-1B radar is the crown jewel of the Aegis combat system. It is a passive electronically scanned array radar, capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously with incredible precision. For 2 weeks, this system had been painting a consistent picture of objects performing impossible maneuvers. The data log showed targets appearing at 80,000 feet, dropping to sea level in seconds, hovering, and then accelerating to hypersonic speeds. The system recorded their velocity, their altitude, their flight paths. It was a detailed, quantitative record of their physics-defying performance. This data was the foundation, the bedrock upon which the entire case was built. It was this data that initially convinced Senior Chief Kevin Day that he was dealing with a real physical phenomenon and not a system malfunction. Then there was the evidence from the E-2C Hawkeye. Its airborne radar corroborated the Princeton's findings, providing a second independent source of radar tracking. While its resolution was lower than the SPY-1, its presence confirmed that the objects were not some localized anomaly or a trick of the Princeton systems. They were being detected by separate platforms at different locations and altitudes. This cross-validation is a critical component in military intelligence analysis. It eliminates the possibility of a single point of failure or misinterpretation. The most famous piece of evidence, of course, is the FLIR video captured by Chad Underwood's @FLIR pod. This 90-second clip is a masterclass in ambiguity and high strangeness. Analyzed frame by frame, it reveals several key details. First, the object itself. It appears as a dark oblong shape in the infrared spectrum, indicating it is warmer than the surrounding cold air of the upper atmosphere. However, there is no visible exhaust plume, no hot jet wash that would be associated with any known form of propulsion, especially one capable of such incredible performance. The heat seems to be distributed evenly across its surface, a uniform glow without a distinct source. Second, its motion. The object is seen rotating and moving erratically before it executes its final stunning maneuver. It accelerates to the left of the screen at a speed that is visually jarring. Analysts have estimated the G-forces required for such a turn to be in the hundreds, if not thousands. No known material could withstand such stress, and no known biological pilot could survive it. The pilot's audible shock on the recording underscores the anomalous nature of this movement. They are witnessing something that their training and experience tell them is impossible. Third, the sensor data displayed on the screen. The @FLIR pod provides a constant stream of information about the target it is tracking, including range, speed, and aspect angle. While much of this data is difficult for a layperson to interpret, it provides a rich field for analysis. The fact that the system, one of the most advanced of its kind, loses its lock on the object is, in itself, a significant piece of evidence. The object simply outclassed the technology designed to track it. Beyond the FLIR tape, there is the testimony of the witnesses themselves. Commander Fravor, Lieutenant Commander Dietrich, and the other pilots provided detailed, consistent accounts of the visual encounter. Their description of a seamless white 40-foot tic-tac with no wings or propulsion is a crucial piece of the puzzle. This visual information, when combined with the radar and infrared data, creates a multifaceted portrait of the phenomenon. It was seen by the eye, tracked by radar, and recorded on camera. Each piece of evidence reinforces the others, weaving together a narrative that is incredibly difficult to dismiss. The significance of this collection of evidence cannot be overstated. In the long and often murky history of UFO sightings, the Nimitz case stands apart due to the quality and quantity of the data. It is a case where the signal-to-noise ratio is exceptionally high. The signal, the strange object and its bizarre behavior, is strong and clear. The noise, the potential for misidentification, equipment malfunction, or human error, is remarkably low thanks to the controlled military environment, the high level of training of the personnel, and the redundancy of the sensor systems. This is the evidence that would eventually force a reluctant Pentagon to acknowledge the reality of unidentified aerial phenomena. It was too good, too well documented, and came from sources too credible to be ignored indefinitely. The data logs, the infrared footage, and the eyewitness accounts from 2004 were a ticking time bomb, waiting to detonate in the public consciousness and change the conversation about UFOs forever. The evidence was secure. The question was, for how long? In the immediate aftermath of the encounters, a strange and unsettling quiet descended upon the USS Nimitz and the USS Princeton. The flurry of excitement, confusion, and mockery gave way to a more formal and far more secretive process. The authority began to assert control over the narrative and, more importantly, over the evidence. The chain of events that followed suggests a deliberate effort to contain the incident, to classify the data, and to bury the story deep within the labyrinth of military bureaucracy. The first sign that this was no ordinary event came shortly after Chad Underwood landed. The physical hard drives containing his ATFlyer data, along with the radar data from the E-2C Hawkeye, were collected. This was not standard procedure. Normally, such data would be retained by the squadron for debriefing and training purposes. Instead, according to crew members who were present, the data tapes were confiscated by two unidentified individuals who arrived on the carrier via helicopter. These men were not part of the ship's regular crew or the carrier air wing. They were described as plainclothes personnel, possibly from the Air Force or a civilian intelligence agency. They presented orders, took possession of all the data, radar, infrared, and cockpit recordings, and then departed. The data was never seen again by the ship's crew. All original copies were gone. A similar process unfolded on the USS Princeton. Senior Chief Kevin Day had been meticulously backing up the Aegis radar data, preserving the records of the strange contacts. He was ordered to turn over all his logs and recordings. The tapes were erased. The official record of the 2-week-long radar anomaly was wiped clean. It was as if the authority was actively scrubbing the incident from existence, removing the digital footprints of the Phantom Fleet. This act of evidence confiscation is a classic trope in UFO lore, often dismissed as paranoid fantasy. But in the Nimitz case, it is a consistent part of the testimony from multiple credible witnesses. The reason for this secrecy remains a subject of intense speculation. Was it to prevent a potential adversary from learning about the capabilities and vulnerabilities of the Aegis system? Was it to hide the fact that the world's most powerful navy was helpless against an unknown technology? Or was it part of a much larger, long-standing policy of denial and obfuscation regarding the entire subject of UFOs? The unofficial response was just as telling. The pilots involved were not subjected to a formal, in-depth intelligence debriefing. There were no teams of scientists or engineers flown in to interview them, to analyze their accounts, to try and understand the revolutionary physics they had witnessed. Instead, the conversations were informal, almost casual, and often tinged with a subtle warning to drop the subject. The message, though unspoken, was clear. This did not happen. And if it did, you are not to talk about it. The incident became a kind of open secret, a sea story whispered among naval aviators, a legend passed down from one deployment to the next. It was a known event within a closed community, but it was not allowed to escape into the wider world. For years, this strategy of containment was successful. The pilots went on with their careers. David Fravor, and Alex Dietrich continued to fly. Chad Underwood never spoke publicly about his role in capturing the famous footage. Kevin Day retired from the Navy, haunted by the memory of the radar contacts that no one in a position of authority seemed to want to understand. The official explanation, to the extent that one existed at all, was a study in ambiguity. For 13 years, there was no official explanation, because officially, nothing of significance had happened. The event was simply not acknowledged. When the story finally broke in 2017, the Pentagon's initial response was a masterpiece of bureaucratic deflection. They did not deny the events, but they did not confirm the details either. They acknowledged the authenticity of the leaked videos, FLIRN, Gimbal, and Go Fast, but refused to comment on their content. They stated that the videos were part of a larger investigation into unidentified aerial phenomena, incursions into military training ranges. This was a seismic shift. The use of the term unidentified aerial phenomena instead of the culturally loaded UFO was a deliberate choice, an attempt to rebrand the subject and lend it a new seriousness. But it was also an admission. The authority was finally, reluctantly, admitting that there was something in the sky that they could not identify. Over time, the official position would evolve, from quiet acknowledgement to the public release of UAP reports and the formation of new task forces. But the core of the mystery remained. The initial response in 2004, the confiscation of data, the erasure of logs, the unofficial gag orders, speaks volumes. It reveals an institutional instinct not toward investigation and discovery, but toward secrecy and control. Why? The simple answer is national security. But what aspect of national security were they protecting? Were they protecting us from the knowledge of a potential threat? Or were they protecting a secret of their own? The actions of the authority in the aftermath of the Nimitz encounter created a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushed a host of conspiratorial theories, each attempting to explain the one thing the official story could not: the motive behind the silence. For 13 years, the story of the Nimitz encounter remained dormant, a secret kept by a small circle of military personnel. It was a ghost story for the digital age, a tale of a phantom fleet that had humbled the world's most powerful navy. But secrets, especially those with evidence as compelling as the FLIR 1 video, have a way of finding their way into the light. The story's reemergence was not the result of an official disclosure, but the work of a new archetype in our narrative, the investigator from the outside. This role was filled by a small group of determined individuals who operated outside the confines of government and military structures. Among them were Leslie Keene, an investigative journalist who had spent years researching the UFO phenomenon with a rigorous evidence-based approach, Ralph Blumenthal, a veteran investigative reporter for the New York Times, and Helene Cooper, a Pentagon correspondent for the same paper. They were joined by key figures from within the intelligence community who had decided it was time for the truth to come out, most notably Luis Elizondo, a career counterintelligence special agent who claimed to have run a secret Pentagon program to investigate UAPs, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or AATIP. This group, a coalition of journalists and government insiders, began to piece together the puzzle of the Nimitz incident. They tracked down the witnesses, who were now civilians and free to varying degrees, to speak about their experiences. They obtained the official unclassified chain of custody documents for the FLIR 1 video, proving its authenticity. They built a case that was too solid for the mainstream media to ignore. The tipping point came on December 16, 2017. On that day, the New York Times published a front-page story with the headline, "Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program." The article detailed the existence of AATIP and, for the first time, described the 2004 Nimitz encounter to the public. It included interviews with Commander David Fravor, who recounted his story with the calm credibility of a seasoned pilot. Crucially, the article also contained a link to the FLIR video, released to the public for the first time. The impact was immediate and profound. The story was not relegated to the fringe tabloids or paranormal websites. It was on the front page of the most respected newspaper in the world. The source was not an anonymous amateur, but a decorated Navy commander. The evidence was not a blurry photo, but a clear, verifiable piece of military sensor footage. The UFO taboo, which had held sway over mainstream journalism and serious scientific inquiry for 70 years, was broken. The investigators' pursuit had succeeded in dragging the subject out of the shadows and into the realm of legitimate public discourse. The 2017 article opened the floodgates. Other witnesses began to come forward. Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, Fravor's wingman, eventually gave her own account, corroborating every detail of his story. Kevin Day, the radar operator from the Princeton, spoke out about the weeks of strange radar contacts that preceded the main event. Chad Underwood was finally identified as the pilot who had filmed the Tic-Tac, and while initially reluctant, he eventually confirmed his role and described his own encounter. The chorus of credible voices grew louder, each one adding a new layer of detail and confirmation to the core narrative. The Pentagon, caught off guard by the leaks and the subsequent media frenzy, was forced to respond. Their initial statements were cautious and non-committal, but they did not deny the story. They confirmed the authenticity of the video. They acknowledged the existence of the AA-TIP program. Each small admission was a victory for the investigators, a crack in the wall of official secrecy that had stood for decades. The story of the Nimitz encounter became a global phenomenon. It was discussed on news programs, analyzed in documentaries, and debated in the halls of Congress. It single-handedly legitimized the modern study of UAPs. The investigators had not just uncovered a single isolated event, they had uncovered a systemic issue. The Nimitz incident was not a one-off. It was, as Elizondo and others claimed, just one example of a much wider pattern of incursions into sensitive military airspace by objects of unknown origin and unbelievable capability. The pursuit of the truth, initiated by Senior Chief Day in the CIC of the Princeton, had been taken up by a new team of investigators 13 years later. Their work transformed the Nimitz encounter from a sea story into a historical event. It forced a reckoning within the Department of Defense and the intelligence community, culminating in the establishment of official UAP task forces and the delivery of unclassified reports to Congress. The investigators' role in this story is crucial. It demonstrates that even in a world of classified programs and institutional secrecy, the truth can be brought to light through persistence, courage, and a commitment to evidence. They took a cold case, a forgotten file in the vast archives of military history, and reopened it for the world to see. And in doing so, they not only revealed the story of what happened in 2004, but they also exposed the decades-long failure of official institutions to grapple with one of the most profound mysteries of our time. Years after the churning water has settled and the phantom blips have faded from the radar screens, the Nimitz encounter remains an open wound in our understanding of the world. It is a case file that refuses to be closed, a collection of facts that resists any easy explanation. The aftermath of the event and its eventual disclosure has left us with more questions than answers, each one more profound and unsettling than the last. What did the crew of the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group witness in November of 2004? The official explanations, when offered at all, have been weak and unconvincing. The authority has never provided a definitive answer. Early skeptical theories proposed that the pilots had misidentified a conventional aircraft, a weather balloon, or some kind of atmospheric plasma phenomenon. But these explanations crumble under the weight of the evidence. No weather balloon can accelerate to hypersonic speeds. No plasma can be tracked simultaneously on multiple radar systems and be seen by the naked eye. The theory of a secret government program, a next-generation drone or aircraft, is more plausible but equally problematic. If the United States possessed technology in 2004 that could outperform the most advanced fighter jets in its own arsenal by a factor of centuries, where is that technology now? Such a revolutionary breakthrough in propulsion, energy, and materials science would have changed the world. It would have transformed our economy, our military, and our society. Yet, there is no evidence that such a leap has occurred. The performance of the Tic-Tac remains as far beyond our public technological horizon today as it was then. This leaves us with the most extraordinary, and for many, the most difficult possibility to accept, that the object was not of human origin. This is the extraterrestrial hypothesis, the idea that we are being visited by intelligent, non-human entities from elsewhere in the cosmos. The Tic-Tac's behavior is certainly consistent with what one might expect from an advanced, autonomous reconnaissance probe. Its apparent curiosity about the naval fleet, its non-aggressive but evasive maneuvers, its silent, effortless mastery of the environment, all of it points to a technology born of a science we do not yet comprehend. But even this hypothesis raises its own set of daunting questions. If they are here, who are they? Where do they come from? What is their intent? The silence of the objects is perhaps the most unnerving aspect of the phenomenon. They demonstrate their power, they observe our most advanced military hardware, and then they vanish, leaving us to wonder. Is it a prelude to contact? A long-term scientific survey? Or something more akin to a zookeeper observing the behavior of animals in a cage? Other, more esoteric theories have also been proposed. Are these objects interdimensional, slipping between parallel realities? Are they time travelers from our own future? Are they a form of consciousness native to our own planet that we are only now beginning to detect with our technology? These ideas, while speculative, are a measure of how thoroughly the Nimitz incident has broken our conventional frames of reference. When confronted with the truly impossible, the human imagination is forced to expand to accommodate it. The ultimate legacy of the Nimitz encounter may be this expansion of possibility. It has forced a serious mainstream conversation about a topic that was once confined to the realm of fiction and ridicule. It has compelled the United States government to admit on the record that there are objects in our skies that are real, physical, and unidentified. This is a monumental shift in the official posture of the last 70 years. The unanswered questions linger, hanging in the air like the tic-tac itself. Why was the data confiscated and erased? Was the authority trying to hide the truth from the public, or was the truth so alarming that they themselves could not face it? What was the significance of the churning water? Was the Tic-Tac an amphibious craft capable of moving through water as easily as air? Did it emerge from a larger, submerged parent craft? And perhaps the most important question of all, if the Nimitz encounter of 2004 was not an isolated incident, but part of an ongoing pattern of activity, what does that mean for the future of humanity? Are we living in a world that is far more crowded and complex than we have ever believed? The case of the Nimitz Tic-Tac is more than just a UFO story. It is a story about the limits of human knowledge and the fragility of our perception of reality. It is a reminder that the universe is not obligated to make sense to us. On a clear day in 2004, the U.S. Navy, the most powerful instrument of human will on the planet, came face to face with an intelligence that operated by a different set of rules. The encounter was brief, but its implications are eternal. We have seen the evidence, we have heard the witnesses, we have analyzed the data, and we are left in the end with the same profound sense of awe and uncertainty that Commander David Fravor must have felt as he watched a silent white object accelerate into the realm of the impossible, leaving nothing behind but a deep and abiding mystery. The file remains open, the investigation continues, and the sky is no longer the limit. It is the question.